Christ to you.
Well, hello again. Good to see everybody online. I especially want to say a special thank you for the visitors who are tuning in for maybe the first time. As a thank you, we want to send you a gift. If you'll text right now Kibler to 41411, we'll send you a link to the Right Now Media app. It is an app that has over 20,000 different videos for Christian discipleship for yourself and for your family. And it's free. We just want to send it to you to help you grow in your walk with Jesus. Here at Kibler and Alma United Methodist Churches, we gather, group, and go. And for the last several weeks, we've been talking specifically about what it is we're supposed to do as disciples of Jesus. And now we're narrowing in to talk about individuals and how we interact with Jesus a little bit differently. We've talked about Markan disciples, how they're ones that are very spirit-driven. They're ones that are driven by a passion and desire for doing the right thing. And we talked about Matthean disciples last week. They're the ones who are literally the ones who build the church. They love to serve. They are servants at heart. And today we're talking about Lucan disciples. Now, Lucan disciples, as you can imagine, come from the Gospel of Luke. And the Gospel of Luke is a very unique gospel for two things. One, the Gospel of Luke is only the first part of a longer letter. The Gospel of Luke was written to a person who wanted more information about the Christian faith. And so Luke, the writer, writes the Gospel of Luke and then writes another letter called the Acts of the Apostles. And so those two actually go together. Although in our Bibles we separate it by the Gospel of John, Luke and the Acts of the Apostles are one and the same. So today we're talking about what does it mean to be a Lucan disciple. And this is important because when we tested disciples of us about a year ago, when we were deciding our discipleship pathway as a church, we tested the Alma church, and they tested very high as a Lucan church. So what does that mean? Well, the Gospel of Luke is unique to the other Gospels in that there are some stories, many stories, that are found in the Gospel of Luke that aren't found in any other Gospels. In fact, there are 16 additional stories or parables in the Gospel of Luke that are not found in any other gospel. You get the gospel or the story of the prodigal son, the story of the two debtors and the lost sheep, the story of the Good Samaritan. All of those are only found in the Gospel of Luke, nowhere else. It's also interesting that the Gospel of Luke opens in a very unique way. The Gospel of Mark opens, and it's John the Baptist, and he's grown, and he's baptizing people in the Jordan, and Jesus comes and is baptized and starts his ministry. In Matthew, they go through this long list of trying to establish the authority of Jesus and very briefly touch on the birth of Jesus before Jesus is grown and starting his ministry. But in the Gospel of Luke, this is the gospel we read every Christmas. It's the gospel that starts from the very beginning. It starts with the birth being foretold of John the Baptist and his family and that whole story about how they interact with each other and how they grew to love one another and how even John's dad had to be silent until the baby was born because that was God's desire. And then it talks about Mary and the angel coming and visiting Mary and saying that she's going to have a son, name him Jesus, and he's going to be the Savior of the world. He's going to be the Messiah, the Christ. And then it goes through the town of Bethlehem and the census and all these different stories. It even has a story, unlike the other Gospels, where Jesus is an adolescent. He's 12, possibly, and he goes to the temple with his family like they would every year. And the family, as they're caravanning in, as they would do, a big group of them would walk together into the city, and they begin to walk home. And they all of a sudden, Jesus isn't there. And the family, Joseph and Mary, they think they've lost him. And so they start to run after, trying to figure out where he is, and they find him back in the city, in Jerusalem, in the temple, teaching the scribes and the Pharisees. What's amazing about these stories is they're all about family. These stories focus a lot on the content of the interaction between Jesus and his family and other people, and less on what Jesus is telling them they need to do. You know, we talked last week about Matthean disciples in the Gospel of Matthew. The Gospel of Matthew is very much like a rule book. It's this new Torah, so to say, where Jesus is this new Messiah coming to bring the disciples a new law, a greater law that gets to the heart of the matter. It's one that Matthean disciples look at, and they can look at all of the rules and they check them out. And as long as their heart's in it, this is a good thing. It grows in their discipleship. The Gospel of Luke, however, focuses less on what you're supposed to do and check off, and more about who you're supposed to be. The Gospel of Luke is very much a relational gospel that focuses on the quintessential loving from the heart. In fact, Lucan disciples, that's exactly how I would characterize them. They are family that loves from the heart. That doesn't make them any greater than any others. Obviously, this is something we should all strive to do. But for Lucans, it comes more naturally because the thing that they feel is the most important is to be inclusive of all folks, to love all folks. Lucan disciples, unlike Mattheans who, when they come to church happens in the sanctuary, where you're sitting and you're doing the creeds and you're singing the songs and you're listening to the sermon and you're taking it in and you're taking your homework, your piece that you get from the sermon or from the message and some sort of action that you want to walk out those doors, you want to do something, you want to serve. That's Mattheans. But Lucans, discipleship starts right here, where you get the coffee, where you get the water, where you're sitting here and literally all you're doing is just drinking coffee and chatting with other disciples. Lucans don't see people as a vehicle that gets them somewhere else. They see people as the mission. People are the point. They would be so comfortable just sitting here, drinking coffee. And they could be here for an hour, maybe longer, just lingering, just chatting it up, just getting to know one another before they ever actually walk through the doors of the sanctuary. In fact, we tried this experiment at Alma, where when I realized that Alma was a Lucan church, I thought I'd try something out. And so we started this weekly coffee time. That was all it was. People to show up in the morning on Wednesday mornings around 9, and we would just show up in the fellowship hall, and we would just have coffee. That was it. And it took on this nature of its own, where folks were coming and they were so dedicated to it. And y'all know who you are. You're watching this. That you took it on. You actually brought out a calendar. I was so surprised. I showed up one day and y'all had brought out a calendar and figured out which weeks who was going to bring the donuts. And when we sat there, we got to know one another. And we grew together. And we got to know who we were and what we love and what our hobbies are. And we got to hear stories, and we got to hear struggles, and we got to hear about how we could pray for one another. And all of these things came out organically. There was no curriculum, no study, none of that. In fact, I think Lucans are sometimes, they kind of tend away from that. They don't like a lot of structure. They like things to be more loose, because when things are loose, it's more inclusive for all folks. I was also amazed that Lucan disciples, they look at their church as an extension of family. They care about people deeply. They don't want to lose anybody. They don't want to upset anybody. Which is also why Lucan disciples, although they're the heartbeat of the church, they're the ones that take a step back and help us to remember people are the point. Because sometimes, if we're honest, we get so busy doing the work, and we get so busy listening to the Spirit, and we get so excited about potential new things and changes that are coming, that sometimes we lose focus that people are the mission. Lucans always kind of bring us back to that, if they speak up. The one thing that's sad about, or weakness about Lucans, is that Lucans oftentimes, because they care so much about people, they don't want to disrupt the equilibrium that oftentimes is established in a church, which sometimes breeds folks to come in and take some dominion, take some authority, take some power. They Lucans are the ones that are most prone to becoming doormats, where when you get a certain personality that comes in, most times Johannines or Markans, sometimes Mattheans, they come in and they take over. And Lucans, because they care so much about the individual, don't want to tell them no. This is why Lucan churches are oftentimes those that can sometimes become institutionalized depression. What I mean by that is that you can go into Lucan churches and there's a lot of things that don't happen. There's a lot of things that don't get done. There's still a group there that love each other, but there's a lot of folks that have come into the church and left the church. And part of it is because there are bullies that come into these Lucan churches and they do what they want. They're the ones that decide that, nothing's being done, and so they want to do it. And so they go out and they start a project around the church, and nobody actually likes it, but nobody's going to tell them no because they don't want to upset that individual. This is a problem with Lucan churches. Another problem with Lucan churches is that we can become relativistic. What I mean by that is because we don't like dogma and structure, and we don't necessarily like organization or institution, we love people. People are the mission. People are the point. We sometimes neglect boundaries. We don't like boundaries. We don't know how to enforce boundaries because we don't want to upset people. And boundaries, regardless of what they are always going to make somebody mad. They're going to offend somebody because people, as we know, human nature, some people don't like being told what to do. So you create these boundaries, and a Lucan church really struggles to do this. That's why in a Lucan church, very often things don't get done. Nobody wants to make a decision to do something because they're afraid of upsetting somebody else. They don't want to drive people away. They want to include as many people as possible. And when they do that without any boundaries and without doing any of the work, oftentimes they actually repel people from the church. Lucan churches also are so in love with each other that they oftentimes become so inward focused on each other and on those relationships they've had for years that they struggle to reach out and build new friendships. Now, they're super hospitable. They're super open to new folks coming in. If anybody were to come in to have coffee, man, they would be right there to put a chair down for you, bring you a donut, bring you a cup. Heck, they'd even give you their own mug if you didn't bring your own, just to make you feel good, just to make you feel comfortable. But where they struggle is to go out and seek new people and be intentional about inviting those folks into their space. Part of it is because Lucans are afraid that people aren't going to like them as much as they like people. The truth is, Lucans, you are the folks that we all like the most. You're the folks that aren't judgy. You're not hypocritical. You're the folks that aren't going to condemn us. You're the folks that we're going to come and we're going to lay everything out to you because we know that you'll love us. But what we need is we need Lucans, that heartbeat of the church, to be partnering with other people in the church, especially the Mattheans, so we can get things done. But Lucans, be careful. Create those boundaries for yourself, for your church, so that you don't become a doormat. You can become a doormat in many different ways. We talked about some of the bullies that would come into the church. If you Lucan churches, Alma, let's lay this out here. I have heard stories in the last 2 years, going on 3 years now, where you've told me about certain individuals who were in your church. They were smart folks. They took initiative. And sometimes Lucans, man, you all see those folks that take initiative, and you stand away and you say, yeah, go get it. But you got to be careful, because if you give folks too much initiative and allow them too much space, they will run the church, and they can run people off. Y'all know those folks in your history who have done just that. Folks that took too much authority and for too long, and you are suffering as a consequence now. Going around the Alma Church, we've done a lot of repairs, a lot of things that have been neglected. Lucans, I love you. Alma, I love you. But if you're honest, you know that in the last 30 to 40 years, there have been major repairs that have been needed at that facility that y'all have neglected to make a decision on. Now, I stepped into that space and said, let's do it. And y'all were right there. Let's get it done. The struggle now becomes you've got to keep those boundaries. Even a pastor like myself, and I've got to be careful to keep boundaries, to bring all things to the table so that we're able to discuss it and have that time to talk and make a decision. Because, Lucans, I know you all won't say no. It's very possible you could get a pastor in who sees the ability to take initiative and just starts doing everything and doing so much. It can exhaust them, but can also exhaust you because they can run over you. They can change so much and so quickly that you don't want to say no because you care so much about them. You've got to maintain those boundaries. One more thing about Lucans. When it comes to mission, when it comes to outreach, these are folks that care very deeply about their community. But be careful, Lucans, that when you go to serve, that you're focusing on the people you're serving. Oftentimes in a Lucan church, and for Lucan disciples, you get really tight with a couple people, and you go and you serve with those folks, but oftentimes you get so focused on talking to each other that you ignore the people in front of you that you're serving. And you're also not extending that invitation to them to say, we'd love to have you come to our church. We'd love to have you, get to know us more. We'd love to get to know you more. Be confident. People do like you. You're the most likable. You're the folks people trust the most. You're the heart of the church. Don't lose that. Be proud of it. Embrace it. Embrace that identity and do the work. But make that invitation. When it comes to gather, group, and go, for Lucan disciples, it probably should be group, gather, grow. And the reason for it is because in Lucan churches and Lucan individuals, you start off with that small group, those few folks that you get really close to, and then you start expanding your circle. You start expanding your circle to gather where the whole church is together, and then to go where you're in ministry and you're out in the community. These circles, you would do good to identify those folks that you're really close to and continue to nurture those relationships, whether that be in a small group in your church or another group of disciples that you meet outside the church. And then when you start to expand that, when you gather together, take that time, and it's good in a Lucan church to have that time before service or after service that you can fellowship with one another, because that's really where you thrive. And that's also, by the way, when visitors come to your church, that's where they're going to thrive. I don't know if y'all know this, Alma specifically, but when we start doing that coffee time, do you realize that the folks that have joined the church in the last year, they came to that they got to know you, and subsequently from that, they have become regulars, and some have even joined the church because they got to know you, and they realized how great you are. There are Lucans here at the Kibler Church as well. Some of you are thinking, well, Doug, you said last week that Kibler's a Matthean church. Yeah, predominantly a Matthean church, but we have Mattheans, we have Lucans, we have Markans, we have Johannines. As a character of the church, we cater to Mattheans, but we have those folks and need those folks that are the Lucans. You want to know who the Lucans are? It's easy to know. Whenever we do Third Friday dinners, Mattheans are the ones in the kitchen, and the Lucans are the ones out at the table sitting down talking to people. And you know exactly who those folks are. You're probably already identifying in your mind right now exactly who that is. There's a person here at this church, I would imagine, at the Kibler Church, that is so Lucan that if I told you, you probably already know who it is. I'm not going to say, but you know who it is. And this individual is always, anytime we serve, this individual is always out there talking to folks and getting to know them and loving them and just being friendly. And that's what you have to have. They're the heartbeat. They're the folks that just love you, and they always are going to love you. And so that's what we need. We need these Lucans in the church. When you look at the Gospel of Luke, there are these stories that really get to the heart of how Lucans see discipleship. they don't really care to be taught a bunch of lessons. Specifically, let's talk about racism, because see, we're about to start something in 2 weeks that is going to be transformative in both churches, and it's going to be very much a part of what we do in discipleship for the next several weeks. After this series, we're going to start a new series on racism, dealing with racism, specifically racism in our church, and not specifically this church or the Alma Church, but church as a broad scope. And we're going to look at the history of America, history of racism in the white church. We're going to be going through a sermon series that I'll be preaching every Sunday. That's going to start on July the 5th. And then on Sunday, we're also going to have a book club. For those that want to join, we're going to do this online on Zoom, where you can either call in or you can get on your computer and you can log in and we'll see your face and hear you. And we're going to look through this book called America's Original Sin by Jim Wallace. I've went through this study before. It was transformative in my life and the life of those that I led. And so we're going to have that book study on Sundays at 11 o'clock, right after service. If you want to be a part of this, you can sign up. All you got to do is you can email me at doug.phillips@arumc.org, and we'll give you the information for the Zoom. We'll also get your address, and I will send you a copy of this at no charge. It's free, just to get you to be able to do this. And this is going to go on for a few weeks. You'll read a chapter a week, and this is not a very big book, so it gives us some time to discuss. And then on Wednesdays, we are starting something July the 1st. We will have in-person small group here at the Kibler Church to start going through a series that is actually found on Right Now Media called The Color of Compromise. And it goes specifically on the history of racism in our churches and where we are today and why there is such a divide between white and black people in churches today and how we can do better to solve that. This is a hard discussion for us to have. It's maybe one that is long, long overdue. I want to talk about how these two churches interact with this subject. Because it is my thought that Mattheans, because they are folks that care so much about structures and institutions, they would get more out of the in-group, in-person Wednesday night studies, which we're going to start at 7 o'clock, by the way, learning about the history, the systems of injustice, racial inequality, and the judicial system and the churches, and the hierarchy that's built, and how to change that. Mattheans will care because that's an action. They can learn, and then they know some way to put something in place. Lucans are going to care about hearing the stories of black folks who have been oppressed, who have been hurt. They want to hear the stories of how these things affected individuals. And they're the ones that they may not know what to do, but to just go befriend folks, to love on them, to let them know that they matter, that they care about them. And so there's different ways that we interact, but there's all these different places, all these different ways that disciples come together to really do the work of Jesus, this ministry of reconciling us to God, to each other, and even to ourselves. Now, that in-group gathering that I mentioned on Wednesdays, there's also going to be an online component. So for those that don't yet want to venture out, you can log online at 7 o'clock, and there's information that we can send you with our newsletter. If you'll email me, I'll be happy to send you the newsletter and let you know how you can get involved. That's going to start July 1st. Now, the in-person gatherings, you're going to have to make reservations because we can only fit so many people in this building, and you have to keep social distance. You can't have physical contact, and you're going to have to wear a mask. These meetings will go for about an hour where we'll watch a video, and then we'll discuss it. And we're going to have to be open to what the Spirit of God is wanting to teach us, because this is so important for us to learn, so important for us to venture out of our comfort zones. And if we truly do this, this will change our lives. This will change the history of our church. This will change our community. It'll make things better. We have not done this work, and we desperately, desperately need to. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Thank the Lucans, who now know kind of who you are and why. And what's so important. You'll go and if you read the Gospel of Luke, you'll see there's so many stories about individuals because y'all care so much about people. Mattheans, you guys are tuning in, and your Markins, you got your stuff last week. Johannines, you guys are still waiting. Next week is our last series on this gospel discipleship. We're talking about Johannines, which your pastor, that's me. I'm one of those. I'm a Johannine. I'm going to talk to you about what that means, where we have our strengths and where our weaknesses are, and what we can do and how we learn. So tune in next week. So for the last part of that, and then in 2 weeks we'll start our new series. I do want to remind you, if you have any prayer requests, there's a link in the bio that you can click on and fill out your prayer requests, and we'll put those in the newsletter for people that know, then they can get their prayers out there. I also want to remind you to give to the ministries of your church, either it be Alma or Kibler UMC. Continue to give to the ACOC. On the checks that you write, you can write in the memo line ACOC and how much of the check you want to go to them, and we'll make sure they get that as soon as possible. It's our local food bank. They need you, and I know that you are continuing to give to them. Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you so much that you have uniquely gifted us and called us as all these different kinds of disciples, and you have shown us how we truly work together as a body. Just because one person's a Matthean or one person's a Markin or one person's a Lucan or Johannine, we all need each other. And even though the whole church as a whole may be catering to one side, we need all parts to be able to work together as a body. Lord, I pray for the continuation of this study next week as we finish, but also, Lord, in 2 weeks when we start this new one. That, Lord, I pray for the transformation that only your Spirit can bring as we talk about hard issues, as we open up our hearts and our minds and our hands to being your disciples and doing the work that you've called us to do. I thank you for these two congregations that love you from the heart, that desire to do your work, who want to be like you. May you bring them closer to each other, to one another, to you, to your Spirit. And God, I pray that even their hearts open up and they realize things about themselves that only your grace can change. We pray this and thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.